Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. We are on the whiteboard today because I want to talk to you about the federal fundraising numbers for the Conservative Party of Canada and Mark Carney's Liberal Party. I did this video for British Columbia recently where I talked about the massive fall off of donations for the BC Conservatives, in part because they've gone very woke or have become very ineffective on many policy fronts or have been rigging things like their annual general meeting. That is not what is happening right now for the CPC. We're only one quarter removed from the federal election, with the federal election having taken place on the first month of the second quarter. But overall, you would assume that if the Conservatives lost the election, while they may be able to bring in a lot of money in April, you would assume that it would drop off the map and that the Liberals would skyrocket after because they got the election bump just the same as Conservatives. But winning should get a lot more people interested in joining the Liberal Party and giving them money. But in fact, in this second quarter, the Conservatives were able to still beat the Liberals. So let's start off with the Liberals. So this is Q2 fundraising, and we have the Liberal Party here bringing in, they brought in 7.7 million. Not the best rating I've ever done in my life, but pretty good numbers for Canadian politics. Under Justin Trudeau, there was months where the Liberals were only bringing in a couple million, and they were in fact closer to what the federal NDP was bringing in than what the Conservatives were bringing in. But the CPC ended up bringing in this second quarter, they brought in $9.1 million, which means that although they spent a lot during the election, they are going to be able to keep bringing in money and spending at high rates. This is kind of the problem for a lot of parties after they lose. They end up having a lot of donors of like avoid them like the plague. They don't want to give any money anymore. You got to shake things up, or else we're not coming back. At the very least, either the Conservatives smashed it in April and it's been a big fall off after that. Really, I actually just think that a lot of Conservatives still really like Pierre Poilievre. They're not going to hold their money back waiting for him to leave before they start donating under a new leader. I think most people going forward into the January leadership review are still on the side of Pierre Poilievre. And I do have to park here and say I am very happy to hear that Jenny Byrne is not going to be in charge of the next election campaign anymore. I and others have been pushing for that, and although I would like to see her have absolutely nothing to do with the party, not even having a different role, it is still progress for the Conservatives to say, hey, this didn't work. Let's stop doing that. But in a second here, I then want to move on to what some of the current polling looks like. Because at the moment, again, despite the Liberals having won and the Liberals being in the middle of their honeymoon period, I think we're going to start seeing the honeymoon period kind of wear off in October, back when the new next session starts and the Conservatives start grilling the Liberals again. But right now, in the middle of it, it's not like they are dominating the Conservatives. The Conservatives are not that far behind the Liberals right now. I'm just going to reset the board and then come back to talk about the recent Palace poll that ended up coming out. Okay, I'm back after a board reset, and this is the recent numbers that we saw come out of a Palace data poll. We have the Liberals obviously currently winning. Again, they just won re-election, they're in a honeymoon period, and there is that kind of Donald Trump effect still going on for Carney and the Liberals. The idea being that because they're standing up to Donald Trump, a lot of people are going to give them their support, because if you're not supporting the Liberals, it's like you're supporting the Americans. But even then, when you look at this poll, the Liberals are at 43.2, the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives are at 37.6, and we have the NDP at 7.5. Now, this basically means that the Conservatives have lost about a point to the Liberal since election day. Lost a point to the Liberals since election day, and they've lost a point or so to the NDP. Naturally, you were considered the big loser of the night. Yes, the NDP lost a lot of their vote, but nobody expects the NDP to go anywhere, so it's just not as dramatic of an impact. But it's not what we're seeing in other pollsters like Nanos. I'm pretty much just ignoring Nanos right now. The problem is when you start showing a 14% lead for the Liberals right after they only beat the Conservatives on the popular vote by a point and a half, I don't really believe you. I don't think people turn on a party they just voted for that dramatically. There is that kind of winner effect that because you won, your supporters after an election are going to be more willing to pick up the phone and tell a pollster that's who they voted for. But if that's what's going on for Nanos, they really got to get a better sample because they got way too many urban liberals picking up the phone to say, I voted liberal, and way too many pessimistic conservatives now not wanting to take a poll anymore. But the Liberals are, in effect, leading the Conservatives by around 5.5 points. Now, again, the Conservatives would not want this result on an election night, but it is not the kind of wide gap that would maybe encourage Mark Carney to call an election. This is a bit too close for comfort. And if we see Mark Carney start to really take it on the chin because of failures when it comes to the trade deal, when it comes to pipelines, when it comes to the job numbers that just came out, we've lost 40,000 jobs in just the month of July alone. You could see Mark Carney's party start slipping down to, I would say, 40% is kind of like a death number for them. In this new kind of two-party situation that we're in, if the Liberals are at 40, and even if the Conservatives are just at 40, the Conservatives, in fact, will win. Now, this is something I want to bring up on screen because it's very important. This is done by Sharia Teest, this analysis. Sharia Teest is brilliant, a very good analyzer of the polls. The guy's literally just a 16-year-old, or I think he's now 17. He's going into grade 12 this next year, and he is one of the best poll analysts that's out there because he's actually good at contextualizing numbers. But Sharia Teest says conservative votes are more efficient than liberal votes now. Imagine telling someone this to somebody 4 years ago. And he's just been running the numbers through his algorithm, different polling numbers, and seeing what kind of seat counts come out of different popular vote results. And that's not artificial at all. Sharia Teest, this 16, 17-year-old, had the most accurate election prediction for the 2025 federal election. And what he's showing right now is that if the conservatives were beaten by 0.5% of the vote, half a percent, they would still win the election. That's unheard of. We all remember 2021 and 2019. Conservatives won the popular vote of the Liberals, and the Liberals still won about 18, 20 more seats than they did. We are in a reverse situation. Conservatives could lose by 0.5% and win the whole election. Maybe not a majority government, but they would get the most seats. Even in this last election, that's what we've seen. The conservative vote has become more efficient. Getting 100,000 votes is worth more to the conservatives than 100,000 votes are worth to the liberals because the conservatives have started to get a very concentrated appeal in certain areas where they're gaining lots of voters, and they're not gaining votes in areas where it doesn't really matter. I think, in fact, if the conservatives were bolder on specific policies and targeted specific communities, their efficiency would, in fact, go way, way up. They could actually go really hard on the fishing issues. They could really go after certain issues around equalization or supply management. I think they would actually start picking up seats in areas of rural Canada that the Conservatives do not win yet, but which the farmers are deprived because of the quota system leaving them out. You know, Manitoba, there's a Saskatchewan seat they can recapture. They could start winning some seats out in British Columbia, Maritimes. I think the Conservatives, not that that's the big issue, but I'm saying that every little small policy issue that you hear at least a sizable amount of people complaining about, you take that on, you end up winning very specific constituencies. The Conservatives became the blue-collar party from taking on issues that matter to working class men. And that's why you see them flip both of the Windsor ridings. One riding that hadn't gone conservative since the 1950s, and the other that hadn't gone to the conservatives since the 1930s. And in this last election, what we saw is that on election night, the Liberals had about 43% of the vote, and the Conservatives had about 41.5%. And even in losing by a point and a half, the Conservatives were actually only 8,000 votes away from winning a minority government. The ridings that made up the margin of victory for the Liberals only had gaps of 8,000 votes for the other 20 ridings or so that the Conservatives needed to win in order to have more seats than the Liberals did. So that tells you that the conservatives are at least getting better at actually finding the demographics that like them. Previous elections, they just said such generic things and they shotgunned their appeal out to as many people as possible that, yeah, they won the popular vote from getting a few more people in the GTA to come out to them, like downtown Toronto voters, because they ran a very mild, nothing kind of a campaign. But that didn't actually result in them winning more seats. So, combined with the current better fundraising they still have over the Liberals, and with the Conservative Party seemingly finding the demos it needs in order to win, I think in the next election they are going to be much better set up, especially since they have now put Jenny Byrne out on an ice float and pushed her out to sea, at least in terms of her campaign management career. I'm sure she has some sort of a job still in the Conservative Party. I don't think she should have anything, but it's progress for her not to be the national campaign director next time around. Now, again, it doesn't mean the Liberals still can't win another government, but I think that if the Conservatives start tightening, hardening their message on things like immigration and energy and like other sort of social issues that Polyev actually has been doing a better job on the last couple of months, they probably can win. Politics is 90% about getting your base out. And maybe I can quickly do a little bit of a bonus lesson on the board before I close this video out. Now, so my bonus lesson is on the idea of turnout. It's on this idea I just mentioned about how politics is 90% winning your base, driving your base out to vote. I find party people can be very silly in thinking that, certain demos kind of have to like us because there's no alternative. And so now we can move on and try and win those, downtown GTA voters and maybe snag a Toronto seat. It's very short-sighted. Here's basically my conception of how the Conservative Party works. The main demographic that votes conservative right now, if you averaged its voter down, or basically if you caricatured what a conservative party voter is, maybe not as much in this last election because the conservative party became much more young and much more blue collar, in part because also older voters have disproportionately voted for the liberals. But historically, I'd say a generic profile of a conservative voter is a family with 3 or 4 kids, mid 50s, maybe later 40s, goes to church. It's that 50-year-old Protestant English couple from Western Canada, or even the GTA, the Southwestern Ontario. The problem with the Conservatives kind of saying, we've won them, what does it matter? Is that the Conservatives, I had actually been predicting this during the election. If the Conservatives could get to 70% voter turnout in Canada, they win. We only ended up getting to about 68.5% turnout in Canada, and surprise, surprise, the Liberals barely snag it. Now, when the Conservatives do things like they tell Arnold Viersen, shut up, don't say anything after he went on a pro-life podcast and said very hardcore pro-life things, is that you're not going to have that 50-year-old Protestant English couple stop showing up to vote in Southwestern Ontario. They'll probably still show up to vote, but your base are the people that you want to be showing up 85% plus. And this is just a prediction. This is just an educated guess. I would say if you took that demo I've just described, I think they probably showed up at a rate of about 72%. It's just a thing that evangelical Protestants tend to show up and vote more than like Catholic voters and whatnot. It's very strange how these different demographics work, especially because Catholic voters tend to be very in Quebec and there's no real parties that run pro-life in Quebec, so they don't really show up as much. But if they show up at 72%, it's higher than the actual turnout of 68.5. But this is something that the party, the Conservatives, will see as, well, that's good, we've won them. And then they will move on to a demographic that is mostly voting liberal. They'll try and go find those voters in the GTA, those more kind of in the middle granola political moderates, who in the last election were probably splitting 60-40. In which if you try and target that demographic and you try and drive them out to vote for you, really all that you're doing is driving out people who are going to be splitting 60-40 liberal. Yeah, you can kind of sometimes identify the conservative leaning aspects of that segment and push them out. Really what you should have been doing is trying to push out this middle-aged, family, like this middle-aged family vote who's religious, smaller suburban areas, whatnot. And you should have gotten them up to an 80% turnout. That is what is going to make up the difference in these ridings. Send your pro-life MPs out and do church tours. Send your guys who are farmers to do like rural small town tours in some of the ridings where the Liberals can conceivably win. That's how you're going to win back the supply management sorts of ridings, because the Liberals firmly have those in their hands because they are the supply management party. The Conservatives are never going to outsupply management the Liberals, and nor should they. So if the Conservatives would send out their John Barlows of the world, they can send out their other rural Ontario guys to just hit every single small town. That's how you're going to win these areas. You don't win by doing a focus group and finding out what people in Toronto Centre, Vancouver Centre, or Montreal think. You're going to win by taking the people who already like you, 72% turnout on the middle-aged Protestant couple, and you turn them into an 80% turnout group. That is how you end up winning and punching the overall turnout above 70. Take the people you already have the roadmap for, they already like you, promise them some extra things to turn that 72 into an 80, rather than as soon as the election starts saying, we're not going to do anything pro-life. I know in my church, I can guarantee you there are tons of people who would vote conservative, but as soon as they say we're not going to touch anything on pro-life, they're like, they may still show up and vote, but if they're tired at the end of the day, they work a physical job and they're tired, maybe they just drive by the polling station and get home. They got something to do. And that's what you're always fighting as a party, trying to prevent people from saying, I got to get up at 7 tomorrow. I'm not stopping to vote. Maybe the Conservatives win anyways. I don't even care. You got to make them want to wait in a 2-hour line for you. That's why politics is all about your base. Politics is not about the middle voter that you win over. Middle voter is very unmotivated. Middle voter doesn't even show up most of the time, so don't bother them. But anyways, a little bit of a rant on Conservative Party politics. I like how the bonus part of this episode basically became longer than the other 2 segments on fundraising and the Palace Bowl, but what can you do? That's just how life works out sometimes. Anyway, so if you liked my videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not yet a subscriber. Like the video and leave a comment on whatever you think about what I just talked about. Anyway, so that should be it for me today. See you guys later.